Welcome to the Grand Hill Chronicles podcast. Noah Healy, and for the listeners, in case I don't get a chance to record a show intro, I sometimes do, I sometimes don't. I'm sorry, I'm a little inconsistent still. One day I'll get it figured out. But Noah Healy is an experienced public speaker and conversationalist with a different and useful perspective. And he describes himself as a recreational mathematician, which I think is great. I like to do some math, although I have not studied advanced math. The farthest I got was calculus, and then my class schedule in college crowded out math from my classes. And Mr. Healy, it says you have diverse interests, including philosophy, cooking, and fiction. So I think that's great. I think you'll fit right in, and we'll have a good conversation. So we had said, hey, we're going to talk about the blurring lines between science fiction and reality. So, I mean, I read this list right before we hit record, but I'll kind of go and hit the list again, and we'll take whatever grabs us.
Well,
and so potential things we could talk about could be artificial general intelligence, faster than light travel, crypto, whether that's currency or certificates like NFTs or anything else that cryptography is used for, or weapons or nanites. So I think you were about to jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Oh, okay.
More about you. What is your professional background? Just so we know, like, kind of where you're coming from.
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of mention. So I got an engineering science degree from UVA last millennium, and I describe it as the mad scientist degree. The engineering science degree is supposed to be for students with a incredibly self-motivated direction that's so strong that, in spite of the fact that the university doesn't formally offer whatever it is you're actually trying to do, you can kind of build a curriculum around going to grad school to do what you want to do. And so most of the department is biomed, which has a graduate department but no undergraduate department.
Is this the your profile says you're based in DC? Is this the University of Virginia at Arlington?
So
UVA?
This is the University of Virginia at Charlottesville. Unfortunately, the profiles on Matchmaker don't do minor cities or towns, and so Washington is an easily recognizable. We're about 2 hours south of Washington, and there are people in Charlottesville that actually make that commute. Which is insane, but that's I'm not actually in Washington D.C. Anyhow, what typifies the engineering science degree is what your electives are, and so my electives were robotics, radiation detection, genetics, and relativity.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down. So, robotics, radiation detection. What in relativity?
Genetics.
Genetics. Okay. It's a nice collection of areas.
That's why I call it the mad scientist degree.
Yeah, kind of. I can see that.
Anyhow,
so
I got out and got a job for a .com, and then deep dove into the internet. And learned a lot about computational mathematics. And so that's been my consuming passion for the last just about quarter century.
Okay. And if you hear some random noises, my son is still in the room. He's just kind of playing by himself. So sorry about the interruption. But yeah, mad science degree. That's cool. So I think you probably saw on matchmaker.fm. I got my degree in music education. I'm not sure if I listed that, but yeah, I got my degree in music education. I taught band for a year, and then I joined the Marine Corps and I played clarinet. After several years, I decided I needed to leave the band for a few reasons. The biggest single reason was that my feet hurt because we did ceremonies all the time. And my feet never stopped hurting. And I would get home and it would just, I'd be destroyed at home and I couldn't help out and wasn't helpful. So So when I left the band, I went to excuse me, I went to officer candidate school and came out Marine officer, and I went into cyberspace from there. So I went to the 6 month um, cyber operations officers course at Fort Gordon. Now they changed the name recently. I don't remember what the new name is, but down in Georgia. And then I went out and into the fleet, served as a cyberspace officer. Um, so I know a little bit more than your average musician about computers, cryptography, etc. In college I considered majoring in computer science, so I know some programming as well. I had a programming job in college, and that background got me through the interview in order to get into cyberspace when I went through the basic school. But yeah, sorry, I find myself talking about me. I'm just trying to contextualize. Like, let's dive in.
Sure.
Uh, so you said crypto is kind of a throwback
Well,
before we hit record.
yeah. You'd mentioned crypto. The current systems around creating cryptocurrencies are actually identical to the stone coins of the island of Yap. If you said you weren't familiar before cutting off, but this is something you can look up. Stone Coins Island of Yap. The Wikipedia article is reasonably accurate so far as I know. There was a Stone Age tribe in the South Pacific, and they used a money based on getting rocks from a nearby island, carving them into these large wheels from sort of the size of a human head to being so large. Some of them are actually incorporated as support structures or even walls of village buildings. These coins were transported back to the home island, with an exception that I'll talk about soon, and it was done at the behest of a family, essentially to demonstrate their wealth and power and so on. But once they make transition, the small ones were used for exchange. The big ones were also used for exchange. So unlike our sort of standardized $1 is $1, and my dirty one and your clean one are both spend the same. These had differential values, sort of based on how well they were made and how big they were and how tough it would have been to produce them in the first place. But their ownership, while the little ones' ownership is physically exchanged, the large ones, if you've got a stone wheel that's 5 or 6 feet across, that's not something that's easy to move around. And so,
Right.
rather than physically move them, they use a gossip protocol, which is actually, there are some blockchains that use gossip
I see.
protocols. Uh,
I hear the term gossip protocol, and I see how it comes back around.
yeah.
Um,
They just told
so,
everybody. So if I was going to exchange my really big rock for your flock of sheep, and we'd agreed to that, we would handshake and then go out and tell everybody that big rock that is holding up the left side of my house is yours now, and that your flock of sheep is mine now. And after a day of telling everybody what the new state of affairs is, everyone would just sort of update their ledgers, and everyone would know that that's my flock of sheep, and that if you take one, you're stealing, and that the left side of my house belongs to you, and that's fine. And if you need to spend it to somebody else, then you'll do so. So I'd said
right.
that they brought almost all of
But
them
these are
back.
just mental ledgers, like
Yes,
word of
exactly.
mouth. Everybody knows.
Right.
Everybody knows.
There's at least one that I've heard of. There might be more than one, but there's at least one rock that nobody living has ever seen. There was a ship
Hmm.
wreck. There was like a storm or something, and the ship went down during the transit process back. But since the
Uh-huh.
process of making a very large, nice one of these rocks isn't something that's done clandestinely, and everybody knows that that rock was made and how good it was and how much it's worth and sort of the cluster of worth. The fact that it happens to be on the bottom of the ocean instead of in public view somewhere doesn't really mean anything. And so that rock was also used as part of the exchange in spite of the fact that it was at the bottom of the ocean and nobody could have any access to it.
Intangible currency right there. So for our listeners who may not know how cryptocurrency works, there's blockchain technology, and uh, you can correct me if I misexplain it, if I explain it poorly, but um, the blockchain is a chain. It's a chain of interactions. What's the word? Um, my goodness.
Well, so
Uh,
the
Transactions.
right
It's a record.
ledger is
It's a
the
record
term
of
that they generally
transactions.
use. Yeah.
Yes. And each transaction, of course, is carried out using cryptographic tokens that we could get into later, but um, we're not here to explain the whole system. But the thing is, let's say that a transaction occurs. Now I update my ledger. Now, who's to say that if I go in there and I scribble something different and I say actually that one belongs to somebody else now, that can't happen in Bitcoin or these other major cryptocurrencies, because there is a community of mutually distrustful servers or computers where word gets around. It's the gossip protocol, and each one adjusts its own ledger so that all the ledgers are the same, but each one has its own record. And there are enough of these that it's not possible. Maybe it's hypothetically possible, but it's really extremely infeasible to fake it, because you can't go around and change the ledger on everybody's device at the same time.
Right. So
And they talk to each other. So
if I wanted to write a false ledger, then I would have to create a chain of these ledger entries that was self-consistent, which is very, very computationally expensive. Um, that I could present as an alternative to the community, and because the cost of generating a chain fork is actually a multiple of the community's computational capacity. As the community grows, the expense of lying to the community grows faster than the growth of the
mhm.
community. Um, so you could imagine some kind of con artist coming to the island of Yap and sort of like explaining to people that actually, you know, everything that they thought that they'd learned as children and stuff was different, and they would just ignore them. But if the con artist somehow had a group of people that was larger than the population of the island, then they might be able to socially engineer that sort of circumstance.
Gaslight the whole community.
Right, exactly. But you might need to sort of individually gaslight each individual, which might require a very large number for each individual. And as you got larger and larger groups that could match up and say, wait a minute, we just met these people. Like, how could they possibly? Right. So it sort of grows very, very quickly. And so
Yeah.
that's what's going on now. Unfortunately, these protocols are based on cryptographic hashing algorithms, which are problems that we don't have efficient mechanisms to solve right now. Now, the gold standard in cryptography would be one of these algorithms that for which no possible efficient solution could exist. We don't know whether
Uh-huh.
or not any such functions could possibly exist. There's there are people who strongly suspect that they could, but we don't know that one way or the other. And what we come up with instead are publicly explored and proposed things that we attempt to attack to get things that currently aren't publicly known to be efficiently solvable. Um, However,
And to
oh yeah,
let's bring that home to our non mathematicians at home. So if let's say I want to encode some data and I want to make it basically impossible, hypothetically possible, basically not possible, just way too difficult for anybody to solve backwards. Think of like, let's say if you took 87 times 23, that's not that hard of a math problem. Um, but if I handed you the product and said, now give me the factors, it'd be a lot harder for you to come back with the 87 times 23. Or you can grab, uh, I don't know, let's say like you make some big long decimal where it's like 32.1659, you throw a bunch of garbage after that. You take two of those numbers and then you multiply it, or no, you take one and then you multiply it by itself. So now you have the square. And if I gave you the answer and said find the square root, that'd be pretty hard for a person to solve. Not hard for a computer, but with cryptography, we're dealing with equations that are uh, infeasible for computers to solve. Where you want you might have seen charts for how long it would take to crack your password if it has this level of complexity, and it's because of this. If you make your password longer and more complex, it makes it much longer for a computer to hack it to solve it the other direction. So if your password is going to take decades to solve, you're probably pretty safe. You just use that password and change it after a while, just in case anybody's guessed it, or maybe somebody brings a huge rig into play, a computer with lots of either graphics cards or application specific cards where it's designed to hash these or hack these, make these calculations very quickly. Sorry, I'm starting to talk around myself. I think I made the point
right,
where
yeah, yeah,
we're making it so I have I have a key, a number that I know, and I can break down. No toques esto, okay? No toques esto. I have a number that I know, and I can give out the the product or whatever, and I throw this around. But the only way for me to prove that I'm the one who knows it is with my private key.
right, yeah.
So,
Uh, the difficulty is that we've been cracking these things right along. So we had protocols that we
uh-huh.
used in the 60s. We had protocols that we used in the 70s. We had other protocols we used in the 80s. We don't use those anymore, and we changed the protocols we were using because people figured out efficient ways to break those protocols. So
Yeah.
if you put one of your very complicated passwords into a system that decides to use security arrangements that go back 30 or 40 years, um, people actually know how to hack those security arrangements, and it doesn't matter at that point how complicated your password is. You could be using the entire text of Moby Dick with random misspellings, and it wouldn't make any difference. The system would just,
Mm-hmm.
the lock isn't secure anymore. Um, the
And
blockchain
for our folks at
technology,
home,
yeah,
this is why it's important to use up to date Wi-Fi standards.
yes, it
If you use
is.
20-year-old Wi-Fi router, then your traffic is not secure. Somebody can come by and sniff it and crack it if it is encrypted in the first place. But yeah, you want more recent Wi-Fi routers because they are capable of using the newer standards that we don't know how to crack easily.
Right.
Okay, so
So these ledgers are being encoded with a hashing algorithm, which is a problem because while the hashing algorithms that are being used are currently expected to probably stand up over the course of the next century or so, uh,
mhm.
any
But what
right,
happens?
any smart
Like, what if?
person could solve this problem at any point between now and whenever it gets solved, assuming it ever does. And
Uh-huh.
and if it does get solved that an efficient mechanism exists, then it would no longer be the case that you would have to bring
Yeah.
this enormous amount of
Yeah.
effort. It would be possible to just have like an ordinary cell phone that would be able to recompute an entire blockchain and put in subtle or gross errors, and we'd have to
Uh-huh.
fall back on more traditional things of, well, I've got a file on my computer and I remember the way it used to be, types of things, which is sort of explicitly what blockchain's trying to get us away from. um,
And the technology with how to solve things is leaping forward right now with AI technology,
uh,
and that is helping us to find how to solve things. So what if AI helps us to build to solve and make practical, what's the word,
well, that's the plot of the final
subatomic, what's computers, atomic, what's the, oh my goodness, I can't remember the word right now, quantum computers, because it's been hypothesized that quantum computers could crack encryption very quickly.
So there's a class of encryption based on, and you mentioned multiplying a couple of prime numbers together, 87 and 23. Uh, there's a class of encryption that depends on the difficulty of factoring prime composites of large primes. There's a algorithm called Shor's algorithm, which has been well known for quite some time now, and is one of the practical quantum algorithms. So if a quantum computer were to be developed, then we would be able to program it using Shor's algorithm to efficiently factor very big numbers.
Mm.
And that would be a death knell for that class of cryptographic protocols. So that's a potential issue. Um,
So
but yeah,
to
I was saying, in terms of this sort of mixing of sci-fi and and reality, the final season of Silicon Valley, that's actually the plot. Their new network protocol that they've been designing for the entire show gets mixed in with an AI system that's continually trying to improve network flow, and the AI
mhm.
system somewhere in its black box creates a model which destroys, uh, reverse engineers an efficient way to break these algorithms, and so they can tell their network to communicate to something, and it will regard the security around that system as an impediment to communication. So it'll just figure out how to break it and then send the message that is what you wanted on the far end.
Yeah, and so much of what we do today is built on encryption, where just basic internet communications are built on encryption, and there are standards in place. Like when you log into your bank, they'd better be using a certain level of encryption, because it's going to be, you want that information to be private, and it should be. Um, so if somebody were to come along and crack it, they could wreak a lot of havoc. Now there are, like, I don't know how realistic it is to just come along and crack it. Like, did you read Animorphs,
I did not
perchance?
know.
Okay, so in Animorphs, it's these kids who
I
encounter
know
an
what the
alien.
series is. Yes,
Yeah, so they, well, I'm for listeners in case they
sure.
don't. So they encounter an alien, and he has them touch a device, and it gives them the power to morph into any animal that they can touch. And then a few books into the series, they rescue another member of this alien species, and he's kind of their hacker in residence whenever they want to go, and because the Earth is being invaded by these other aliens called the Yeerks, and now this one, they call him Axe. It's a nickname, but Axe, he comes from a more advanced technologically advanced society, so he understands computers because why not? And he finds Earth's computer systems laughably insecure, which at the time, I kind of I'm like, okay, whatever, but don't you have to know particular information about that system to be able to hack it? And in many cases, yes, you do. In some cases, you don't. In a lot of cases, uh, this is back in the '90s. Things were laughably insecure, and things just going across the internet in plain text, or meaning unencrypted. So if you're a third party and you can intercept or just sniff internet traffic and see what people are saying. You don't have to intercept, but if you can listen in, you have the messages and there they are. Now you have passwords, you have sensitive information, and oh, perdón, one moment. Oh, que te chupe. No. Toma un poco. Sí, sí, eso quiero decir, que tome un poco del jugo. Sí. Ya. Okay, gracias. Yeah, so like looking back 20, 25 years from now till then, yeah, if you knew the basics about computer security, you would see that, and you would have to know some particular information about how these systems work, but that's not too hard to come by. But if you know that, and you know cybersecurity, back in the day, like you take knowledge from now back to then, you could do so much. And like it happens along the way. It happened bit by bit, where somebody figured something out and they made some illicit bank transfers and stole millions of dollars. And banks figured out what happened and adjusted and made it so that that thing can't happen again. And so, things have kind of been ramping up security, and somebody's always looking for the next vulnerability. And right now, we're kind of just talking about the bleeding edge of what our technology looks like broadly. I guess I shouldn't have said bleeding edge, but I do hope to bring it around to fiction soon. But I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's okay.
I forgot.
But yeah, this gets into you're touching on some very serious issues of our society essentially becoming sci-fi. So,
oh yeah,
historically, we've had zero issue with, or very close to zero issue with identity, because virtually everybody would be born, live, and die within a few dozenish miles of where they were, and the people around them would know who they were because they knew their parents, or were heard them being born or something like that, and would know their life histories because that's all there was around. And so we'd have very, very deep identities that were embedded in your face and your features and the way you walked and what you did when you were 6 or something. So in a digital environment, the anonymity is cranked up to 11. So the sorts of much more efficient kinds of currencies that were created with cash, that allowed urban living to be a real thing, because once we get to cities, that I knew his parents and I knew his grandparents stuff doesn't really work anymore, but we can use like stamped silver or gold coins and get some of that stuff done. But physical exchange is out the window once we drape wires and start shooting laser beams across the planet to do things. And so we need even more sophisticated methods of determining selfhood and agency. And AI puts that into the blender, because up until fairly recently, you could be quite confident that anything you were looking at that had a certain level of style sophistication had to have been produced by a human being, and
Yeah.
AI can now pretty effortlessly mimic Shakespeare, Hemingway, or if you're an author, and most people have backlogs in the thousands and tens of thousands of emails. So you are an author. Your style could also be chewed up and replicated as well.
For everybody's information, we're not there yet for AI to produce full books that are good. Not yet.
Yeah.
Surely we'll get there someday. But um, like, yeah, I wrote this. I didn't use AI to write. This is my book, Nightshade Unicorn Forerunner. Um, I didn't use AI to write it. I yeah, I dictated a lot of it, but it was either typed or spoken, all from me. But then I did use some tools. Pro Writing Aid is an AI based tool that can help find mistakes. It even suggests rewording, uh, but I look at those rewording suggestions very carefully because um, some of them are wrong, and some of them are not what I wanted to say, not how I wanted to say it. I want it in my voice. Um, but yeah, one day it'll get there.
Well, yeah. So right now, content is really not something that AI is up to speed on beyond very, very simple
But
exploration. So anything that's would be as interesting as a complicated plot isn't something that AI is doing right now in public at any rate. But again,
yeah,
styles. If
that we know of.
right, yeah, yeah. If if you have a grocery list, you can hand it to these generative AIs and say, rewrite this in the style of Arthur Conan Doyle, William Shakespeare, the Bible, and it will, and
Uh-huh.
and it will produce a list that contains the same contents as your grocery list and doesn't use the same words. And superficially, sure, it looks like something that Moses might have dictated if he needed
It's
to run somebody out and pick up eggs and bananas at the
yeah,
corner grocery store. Uh, because
it's really sorry.
yeah, sorry, yeah, go.
It's crazy. It's really interesting. Where it's not only fascinating how the AI can do this or do that, but it's really interesting to see where it gets it wrong. So I took my book and I needed to make a map, and I did that, of course. But in order to make sure that I didn't miss anything important that I had mentioned in the text of the book, and I wanted to get ready to write the second book, and so I wanted a list of place names, and I wanted a list of character names so that I didn't forget anything. Because like if you read Forerunner, you'll come away and there's a character who's moderately minor in his role, but he does play a part. But his name is Nolder, and if you've read Forerunner and you come away and Nolder took his part in the book, and now we're past that part, and now um, hypothetically I could leave him, but no, I can't. I have to bring him back because of the way that he played his part in this book. He hinted at having a significant backstory that the reader would be interested in, that I'm interested in. I want to know his backstory. I haven't written it yet, but he has a backstory, and it would be lousy, lazy, remiss of me. I would be remiss to not bring him back and share that backstory. So I wanted to have a list of all the characters to make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. Like Nolder has to come back. Curast probably has to come back. And these are bad guys, by the way. but Nilin obviously has to come back. He's going to play a role. Um, but the Firen and what's her husband's name? Anyway, that family, maybe they never come back. I just wanted a list of place names. I wanted a list of character names that appeared in the book. So I took it to Claude, Claude.ai, and I had to break it up in pieces and give it. It took about 7 pieces, and say list all the places found in this story, list all the characters found in this story, and I did that, and it left some out. It left some out. So when I was taking these 7 chunks of lists and then compiling them and getting rid of the duplicates um, of the places and the characters, it left some out. And if I were to ask it, like, now what about this name? And it would be able to say, oh yeah, that's that character that did this. Um, but it left it out. So it's intriguing how it's followable like
Well,
people are.
the thing, yeah, well, it's not followable like people are, but it's followable in ways that are anthropomorphizable the way that people are.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the systems are trained to perform some specific task, which for a wide variety of the interface that we're using it for looks like sort of a conversational, you know, hey, do this for me type of behavior. But what they're actually trained for is whatever that task actually is. There's an intriguing thing. They've managed to clean this up a little bit, but uh, there's been an approach to come up with very good game AIs. It's called reinforcement learning, and
Uh-huh.
it creates this situation where effectively what happens is the computer develops this very powerful, almost intuitive sense of how a specific game functions. And so it gets this sort of probability sense of the various actions it could undertake and what effect that would have on its probability of victory. And this approach has been used for poker, diplomacy, Stratego, chess, Go, and a number of other games. Um,
Uh-huh.
so when it's playing like chess or Go against world champion level players, uh, it will play pretty normalish games. It tends to be a little surprising fairly early in the opening. So like the first few moves are what everybody does because we've all learned and those are the best. After 3 to 5 moves, it starts doing things that look a little weird, but not necessarily truly shocking. And it sort of for the next, depending on the kind of game, the next half dozen to few dozen moves, it's just sort of doing stuff that's odd, and you're not quite sure what's going on. But at a certain point,
Mhm.
and for chess, this is usually in the end game. For Go, it's way better than us at Go, and so it actually happens in sort of the early middle game. It'll just make a move that's stupid, and it's not that's not some very very deep idea that we're just not smart enough to understand. It's just that it's reached a position that's so dominant that it can't tell the difference between stupid and good moves anymore. So it's
Mm.
reached a position where it's calculated that it has basically a 100% chance of victory over you. And so if it makes this really dumb move, it still has a 100% chance of victory. But if it makes this really
Because it didn't matter.
right, because it doesn't matter. Like it's so dominant, it doesn't matter. And so it just starts making these weird, random moves because you've lost the plot. Like you, the human, don't understand this game well enough anymore. And it's like I can't even tell the difference between good moves and bad moves now because it's just totally dominant. Um, and so humans, like people look at these and analyze these games, and it's like, oh, it's toying with us. It's just or it's just checked out mentally. It doesn't care anymore. But that's not what's going on. What's going on is it's it's developed this model for how to sort of sense win probabilities, and there's a limit. When it gets up to 100% chance of victory or 0% chance of victory, it can't do anything else anymore. So if you get into a position where it has nothing good to do, it'll just do anything. It won't try to
Uh-huh.
fight. It'll just like, whatever, just checkmate me already. Or if it's in the other position, it'll just be like, whatever, here, have a queen. Like, like, I'm winning anyway. It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh wow. So I have a few stories that are not published that I'm reminded of as we talk. I do have a robot uprising story. Uh, I call Arbot, which is actually the anglicized uh, version or reading of Yavot, which I don't know if it actually makes grammatical sense in Russian, but the backwards R means I, and Vot, which looks like it's spelled BOT, um, is basically here. So it's I here, or I am here. Is the angle I'm taking for Arbot. And guess what? That was the branding on some robots, some anthro android
Anthropomorphic.
humanoid robots. And in the story, they came from Russia, so the branding makes sense. It's literally that. It's the backwards, the character that looks like the backwards R. It's not a backwards R because it's not a Latin character. It's Cyrillic. Um, but yeah, the Yovot looks like Arbot, and it sounds kind of like robot. So that was convenient. And that's where I had the idea for the story. So there's the robot uprising, and that would be near-ish future, probably a decade and a half away, um, maybe closer.
I
Where
I don't really see robot uprising as much of an issue. I see the really serious issue that
oh yeah, this there's actually
oh,
it's not purely a robot uprising. It's more of a human takeover with
okay.
the robots as pawns.
So
But
I don't see that as much of an issue either. I think it's much more likely that the systems simply disintegrate in the attempt at human takeovers. So, for example, uh, just recently, I think within the last week, the Wall Street Journal put together a piece where the author had spent $105 to build an automated partisan content farm just to see what it took. So
$105.
yeah. So they created a website. They gave it a name that was similar to the name that they're specifically operating, I believe, in Ohio. So they created a name that was similar-ish to the sort of big Ohio newspaper. So it's like the Buckeye Tribune was the name of their fake site, um, and they decided to make it pro-Republican. They have a Democratic senator and there's a Republican challenger, and they were like, okay, this entire thing's going to exist to like support the Republican. And the what it does is it goes out and web scrapes. It looks for stories that are relevant to the region that it's writing about, and it rewrites those stories with a partisan slant, um, in the voice of sort of UPI style and so on. So it looks like newspaper reporting, but it's all done in the service of supporting his candidacy. And so one of the things it did was there was some cannabis legislation that was being debated. and a story about it was written. And so this thing wrote a story about how the incumbent Democrat, now this is a state issue, so this is not like the federals aren't really involved, but
Uh-huh.
the story that it wrote claimed that the incumbent Democrat was against the law and was working sort of, behind the scenes or underground or something to subvert this effort. But the Republican challenger was supporting this and was going to, sort of make it happen once he got to Washington or whatnot. Now that was all made up. There's no mention of any of that in the story that was originally written, and I believe the Republican candidate, insofar as he has platform positions on this, wasn't pro legalization. So, but like the bot understands enough about the valence of issues that the pro legalization side is sort of the right side to be on from a political point of view, and so it just ascribed that view to the candidate it was told to support, and the other one to the candidate it was told to slack off, and just
Hmm.
wrote that story and put it up online and posted it, and did SEO and all the rest of this stuff.
Crazy.
And yeah, and $105. So, you know, think about voting. Have you ever made a voting decision based on anything other than your personal experience with the candidates themselves? So, have you ever voted for a
I think
president based on anything other than intimate conversations that you've personally had with the candidates?
I think very few people have had the privilege of having that close connection with the candidates to
Ex-
be able to make those voting decisions.
e-
It's
e-
all secondhand
right, exactly.
for most
So,
of us.
if we can simulate secondhandness to a decent degree and just flood the zone so that there's not one local newspaper, or two channels that you watch, or you know 50 different perspectives in your Twitter feed. But if for $105, you know presidential campaigns raise billions of dollars now. What if there could be 10 million
Mm.
news channels
Oh wow.
that we're doing? What if
Well, I would hope
for every 5 or 6 voters, there was a news channel dedicated to explaining why you should be voting for Jim instead of Joe and Joe instead of Jim?
that we would learn how to filter them, but I know that so many people don't learn how to filter. Like you learn how to recognize offshore scammers trying to fish for your information and steal your money. Like little punctuation errors or the way that they talk too respectfully. You get a sense for it, uh, and yet it works on people.
It works on enough people that it's
People
worth
don't figure it
doing.
out.
And the thing is, adaptation responds only to selection that's actually in the environment. So the most important thing to your body functioning is oxygen. If I cut off your oxygen supply, you're going to die in seconds. Maybe if you've sort of prepped and ready for it, minutes, but pretty quickly. Uh, you have absolutely no ability to determine what your blood oxygen level is. That's not a thing
Mhm.
that the human body is capable of doing. Uh, and so that's why people that are actually at risk, divers, astronauts, stuff like that, they have monitors. That you have to have these things that you like clip on your ear, or have a catheter
Yep.
inserted in some place, so that you can have a display that tells you whether or not you're breathing, because you can't tell whether or not you're breathing, because in the ordinary course of our lives we can't go anywhere that doesn't have oxygen in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So we've built social institutions on this basis that every kind of complex communication can only possibly have come from another human being, and there can really only be so many human beings. That scammer can't call up everybody in the country at the same time, except we actually can create entirely new faces that can be animated reasonably identifiably, and a brand new voice that, again, the voices are getting good enough that they actually sound like people.
Uh-huh.
And we could have scripts that can be tweaked by AIs to be personalized, and that combination of features, all of which are publicly demonstrated, means that you could get Skype calls from people who do not exist to claim things that are false, and
Uh-huh.
a single entity could develop millions or billions of those simultaneously. And so what
So
does
you're talking
oh yeah,
the Cortana from Halo, or the emergency medical hologram from Voyager.
right, except that those are both
Except, you know,
explicitly created as part of a story as helpers. What if the emergency medical hologram, instead of being that slightly irritating but ultimately warm-hearted thing that he is, uh, what if that was that what if that was inexpensive enough that like children had access to that kind of
uh-huh.
technology? um,
You get a Skype call from evil Cortana, or from scammer uh, doctor, or whatever he called himself. I don't
just
remember.
just pranks. Some teenager decides to create 15 of them in order to create this plausible story about why they didn't do their homework because they had to pull a woman out of a burning building, and here's the woman and her kid.
Oh wow. Yeah. Well, people are gonna have to adapt.
Right.
The world's gonna adapt, and hopefully more of us will go outside and touch grass, and be more in touch with actual reality, and other biological people.
Well,
Um,
I think that's a good move, and I hope that's part of what we decide to do. Because, like I said, I think it's a good move. But my work is around finding what those institutions could look like that can have inputs from potentially malicious, potentially artificial, and artificial and malicious are independent. You could have artificial, beneficial in inputs and so on, that have that much greater level of robustness, so that they can tolerate the capacity to produce noise at the capacities that we're actually demonstrating.
mhm. Well, we're going a little long, so I think I'll call it for today. Uh, if you don't mind, stay on after we hit the stop button on the recording.
No, not at all.
But I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Normally at this point, like, most of my guests are other authors, and I invite them to share where listeners can find them on the web. Do you have anything that you would wish to share?
Absolutely. So I actually host a podcast with the retired CTO of Reddit about AI and its impacts on society. So the fourth age, the AI revolution. Uh, Also, as I mentioned, I'm working on my system. The government, sadly, is resisting quite strongly. I have a petition up on change.org under CDM patent. You can check out more about what's going on there, and I would ask anybody who can sign to do so.
Okay, I'm making a note to check that out. Um, okay, thank you, and we'll catch you next time.